I'm Jim, and welcome to the weekly message from Hummelstown United Church of Christ, right here in Hummelstown, Pennsylvania. We're the small church with a big heart, a place where everyone is truly welcome and where all can belong. Whether this is your first time joining us or you're a familiar part of our family, we're glad you're here. To learn more about our community, visit us online at hummelstownucc.org. Now, let's open our hearts and prepare for today's message.
So how often do you deal with leftovers in your meal planning? For some of us, it's every day. For others, not often. For some, preferably not. Maybe you're a leftover lunch packer, where yesterday's dinner becomes today's lunch. Or maybe you're a no leftovers ever person. I come from a family of leftover people. My parents even have special containers that they take with them when they go out to eat, so that they can take the half of the meal they chose not to eat for lunch or dinner the next day. In my house, we plan for 3 days a week of leftovers as dinner. So I was surely raised as a leftover person, and I still decidedly am. And that element of this story is one we don't often think about or we rationalize away. But those leftover pieces, the 12 baskets, make its way into all 4 gospel versions of this story. And 12 is an important number if we think about the 12 tribes of Israel, how Moses walked with the people and God fed them on manna and quail on the journey. The allusions are there in the dividing of the whole into smaller units to parallel with Moses' story, and the provided simple meal of meat and bread. So yes, those baskets of leftovers are about fulfilling a specific theological point. But think of what 12 baskets of leftovers would be like after eating your fill. The text tells us that all ate and were filled. And what shall we do with all that is left over once the people move on? What are we to do now with all of this excess fish? We know what happens to fish when it's left around for a while. What happens in this moment after the impossible becomes possible is the question not for the itinerant teacher, but the ones who have been left with the excess. We often think of the leftovers as the unwanted, the less important, the scraps of the meal. But what if part of the point of this story is for the disciples to actually see those people are as critically important to be cared for? Mark sets this scene immediately following sending the disciples out 2 by 2 to preach and heal, taking nothing but the clothes on their backs. No money, no advanced hotel reservation, no cooler full of snacks. Our theme authors noted that Jesus prompted them to go out and live in a model of interdependence. Going in pairs meant that they were never serving in isolation. Going without food or money meant that they would be forced to rely on the generosity and hospitality of others. Perhaps Jesus was training them not just to give, but also to receive. Then, when the disciples return to Jesus and tell the tales of their experience, the times they relied on the generosity of people they didn't expect to get along with, then the unexpected happens, and they all find out that John the Baptist is dead. So Jesus pulls them away in a boat to a deserted place. The hardships of their new power and positions are compounded by the trauma of the moment outside their bubble. The world goes on, and it's hard. But we still have to take the kids to school. We still have to pay the utility bills. There's a meme or this post that essentially says, I didn't know the end of the world would come with so much laundry. And maybe the disciples are feeling that in their moment too. The major shifts of their experience are still rolling around in their heads, and they're coming into this moment too full to capacity. But Jesus doesn't ignore those people. He attends to them anyway. How much more can I possibly do? How much more can I care for? How can I attend to all of this? And Jesus asks us to provide for the needs of the gathered multitudes, they may be thinking in their minds. They have lived upon interdependence in their time without Jesus, and yet they still default to some individualistic mindset and approach. They surely must be struggling to choose interdependence, to focus on that community care that they received in this moment. So Jesus uses the moment to teach to them as well. To recognize that being in the moment with the people in the front of us is the work of the moment. There's a poem that says, "Yet here we are, doing laundry, making dinner, making poetry, making the mindful choices, living in every moment, because it is this moment. Every action, its own action." They are to feed the people. They are to figure out what they have to use, and then to arrange all of those chaotic people down into small enough groups to be manageable, then to distribute this magnified meal, then to take up those leftovers, which themselves contain more than the original meal in the first place. Because nothing is impossible for God. Because the good news is that together the impossible is possible. Is it the food that is impossible? Or is it that these disciples are to be the tools of divine action, even when they are overwhelmed and burdened? You certainly can't claim Jesus doesn't have the ability to mobilize a movement. And here in this story, I think he's trying to teach that to his disciples by forcing them to act. A good understanding is nothing without the practical experience to follow it. You know, when Jesus tells everybody to get organized into specific groups, to sit in 50s and 100s, he puts them in groups small enough that they could get to know one another, to care about the stories of those around them. They become models of the churches that will function in the years to come as the spreaders of the good news, the gospel, which provides some insight into early community organizing, the communal care that was needed. Caring for others was a crucial aspect of those early churches who sat down and made sure that everyone had food, who made sure that everyone could attend to their own needs together. And caring for others is a crucial aspect of sustainable movements for change and longevity today. Because you cannot continue to rally without the people behind you to hold you when you come off the front line. Even penguins know this. You've seen those videos, I'm sure, of emperor penguins in Antarctica standing in circles, except they're not standing. They're constantly moving in spirals of inside to outside and outside to in, so that the warmth is shared, so that the burden of the cold is shared too. The burden of life is carried by the group if we organize into right-sized groups for the concerns upon us. Compassion is the energy source, but action is the conduit and the multiplier. And that is why the leftovers outstrip the original offering of the meal. The shared burden of hunger, the shared burden of providing for others is passed through thousands and thousands of hands, and so the impossible becomes possible. Society tries to drill into us the idea that we must be able to fend for ourselves. And though tending to the needs of a whole community is often an overwhelming task, if the job is shared, it becomes easier. The letter to Ephesians reminded those early followers that the power at work within us is able to accomplish abundantly far more than we can ask or imagine. Forever and ever, amen. And that is certainly true of this moment in the deserted place, with its green grass and its groups of 50s and 100s. God cannot be limited by the fears of the disciples, and God cannot be limited by the quantities available. God exceeds because God is excessive. Jesus has compassion for the crowd and insists that they will be cared for from just what the disciples have to offer, which will be enough, because it's what's here. The crowd mobilizes into action, and everyone is fed. Here we are doing laundry, making dinner, making poetry, making the mindful choices, living in every moment, because it is this moment. Every action, its own action. Every overflowing basket of leftovers is a reminder that the crowd mobilized for compassion will exceed our expectations every time. And every overflowing basket of leftovers is a reminder that the work isn't done, and it still goes on with the people in that crowd who remain behind when the disciples have left. So pack your Tupperware, your lunchbox, or your freezer. Pack it up and hand it over to your neighbor, because God's meal is more abundant, and God accomplishes the impossible abundantly together. Amen.